Hello, I'm Jonathan Bowman-Perks, and welcome back to my favorite time of the week. As part of the Inspiring Leadership series, I'm very fortunate to be interviewing Derek Kehoe. And Derek is the CEO and head of country for Ireland for BNP Paribas. Derek, welcome. Great to have you on the series. And perhaps would you tell us a little bit about current role, what you're doing, and also just a little snapshot of perhaps some of the roles you've been doing since leaving school, perhaps.
Sure, yeah, with pleasure. And thank you for having me. So I currently am, as you say, CEO and head of country for BNP Paribas Group in Ireland. And we have a diverse set of businesses in Ireland. We currently employ about 620 people. Our main business will be corporate and institutional banking. So catering for very large corporate clients and large institutional clients, and then all of the multinational clients, of which there are many in Ireland, obviously. We also have a fund administration business, some insurance companies, and a real estate advisory business as well. So a substantial and I would say complex platform. I've been with BNP Paribas for 18 years. I was 18 years last week, actually, in BNP Paribas.
Congratulations.
But I've been 33 years now in financial services. For the better part of that 33 years, I was always on the capital market side. So my very first job when I came out of university, I'd actually trained as an economist in university, but I got a job in Standard Chartered Bank, which were in Ireland at the time, and they had a vacancy in the Treasury Department. And it was literally the week after the Black Monday crash of 1987. And I said, wow, it was all over the news. It looked so exciting. I said, I want to be in Treasury. And I've been, I was in those roles within global markets ever since. So foreign exchange, fixed income, debt capital markets and sort of debt capital markets advisory. And then in 2015, I had the opportunity to take over as head of country for Ireland, which is obviously a much more diverse role. No need per se for product specialism. You just need to know everything and be on top of everything. And it gave me the opportunity, obviously, to develop my leadership skills, be much more involved in terms of the governance and the implementation of the strategy for the group in Ireland. So that's what I've been doing for just over 5 years now.
Fantastic. And the reason that we're doing this is because people have said they find you a very inspiring leader, which is lovely. I don't like leaders coming on and go, hey, Jonathan, I'm an inspiring leader. Have me on your series. Go, no. It doesn't work that way. So it's lovely what they do enjoy working for you. But think about who's inspired you to inspire others. Could you think of a couple of people who've inspired you? And also, generically, what kind of qualities do you find in inspiring leaders, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't have a single go-to inspiring leader. I mean, there are lots of people, present and past, that I think are incredible, but there are lots of people who are completely anonymous, who have never crossed anybody's radar screen, that I personally find very inspiring because I've met them. And all of those people, from the greatest to the least, share certain characteristics, which, humility, honesty, integrity, courage, being true to self. I think in even the most, like I say, innocuous of people who are performing a leadership role, which they may not even be aware they're performing. The key to them being inspiring is having those characteristics, in my view. Honestly, if somebody said to me that I had those characteristics, then I would be done. But I think it's a process of continual learning and aspiration to become your best self, obviously. But over the years, I've had some truly inspiring people that I have worked for who have been great leaders. And again, their key characteristics, apart from that, has been an ability to communicate, to have a vision of where they want their business to go and be able to articulate that vision to people, to be able to deliver messages, even negative messages in a way which is constructive, and that's really a difficult thing to do, clearly. So yeah, and there are so many business leaders that I admire that just keep going, and they're not doing it to get some sort of short-term buzz out of it. They're doing it because it is part of their DNA to give their best all the time.
Yeah.
So they're the characteristics as opposed to the individuals that I find very, very inspiring in leadership.
No, I love it. It resonates very strongly for me.
Yeah.
And in the topic that you talked about then and we discussed earlier, this humility and to admit you don't know. Because when you as the CEO admit that you don't know, it allows others to admit they don't know rather than bluff it. And when they bluff it, then problems will follow. Yeah. Or someone more junior to go, I know, you're great. Bring it on. Let's hear what you know. And with it comes a vulnerability to learn from mistakes. I think learning from life is compulsory, having life experiences I think is compulsory, but learning from it is optional. And if you were thinking about what you'd learned from the mistakes that you've made in the past or you make now, could you think of a particular story or a situation?
Sure, yeah,
but you got it wrong.
Yeah. Well, I can think of many situations where I've got it wrong. I will continue to make mistakes because I'm only human, and so will the people who work with me. The key is obviously to learn from those mistakes, to take something from them, to fix the issue that caused the mistake, and to try and ensure that it doesn't happen again. So, I'm really a big believer in a learning culture. I really am a big believer. I hate, and we've all worked in organizations where there's a blame culture. So then people begin to bury their mistakes. They don't admit to their mistakes. They pretend they know it all, and they don't know it all. So what you said, Jonathan, is absolutely correct. People need to be encouraged to hold their hand up and say, look, I'm not sure here. Can you help me? And then true leadership, I think, comes out. From my personal perspective, certainly when I took over my current role, I think that I went from being sort of one of the team to being the leader of the team, and the team was growing ever larger, and it has grown over the years. But for me, I feel with the benefit of hindsight, there was probably things that I knew should have been fixed a little bit quicker, that I hoped would evolve as the organization evolved. And they weren't right in the beginning, and by the time that we fixed them, they haven't been right for some time. And I should have just gone with my gut instinct and said, look, I know that there are problems here, and I just need to make tough decisions and get this done. And I think probably, again, with the benefit of hindsight, and I'm a big believer in critical self-analysis as well. I'm constantly asking myself how I could have done it differently or better. And I think that's a healthy thing, being honest. Maybe I just didn't, maybe I wanted people to like me too much as opposed to actually going with what needed to be done. Or indeed, maybe I just didn't have enough confidence in seeing what was obviously in front of me. But I think you learn those things as you go along. And my key takeaway from that is, as I said before, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So if something is not right, you're probably, I don't believe that you should just accept things or kick the can down the road. I think it's incumbent upon everybody who's in a leadership or a management position to fix the things that are broken, not leave them to the next guy.
Yeah, and that's where behind me the LQ over my shoulder is about legacy and leaving a legacy where you leave things better than you found them.
Yeah.
And what you say resonates with a bit of advice I had from a leader years ago, which stuck in my mind. And he said, as CEO or in any role, when you are in the organization, probably in those early days, you've been there a while, ask yourself, what is it I know now about this person who I'm having a problem with? What is it that I know now about them that I will find out in 12 months' time, but I already know it? Yeah. And he said, in this particular case, I knew this person was devious and deceitful, and I had to get rid of them before it blew up and it became a problem. He said,
yeah,
but I waited 12 months and then it blew up. And I
yeah,
went, I
yeah,
knew that 12 months ago. Why did I
yeah,
wait?
yeah.
And so there's a balance about not rushing into things,
Well, this is it. You're absolutely right. You know,
but
you
then
can't just pull the trigger and ask questions later either. I mean, people deserve time to prove themselves.
Mm,
And you know, you'll always have this, you know, but I think in my situation, I probably waited too long in the earlier days for certain situations to resolve themselves. And it's a fact that you know, difficult conversations have to be faced head on. They
yeah.
can't be deferred.
And bad news does not get better with
Yeah,
age. Bad
yeah,
news does not get better with age. So you got to admit it. Yeah, great advice. And then I always love to hear amusing stories, because leadership is a very serious business, but actually it's not. It needs to be a lot of fun too. But half the fun is stories when things didn't go well, or just incredulous stories that become legend. And you have a great story. I'd love to please tell us.
yeah. I have to say, other people are going to have to tell the stories about my leadership inadequacies. I have many, but I'm going to let other people tell those. I mean, when we were chatting earlier on, Jonathan, I said to you, you know, like everybody else, I've had some amazing leaders and some amazingly bad leaders over a 34-year career, and I'll never forget. I mean, we were just after the financial crisis, all hell had broken loose. Banks were really in a kind of fight for survival mode, I would say. And we had a new boss came in, very much an unknown quantity to us, but with a very, very strong reputation. And I had clients at the time that I wasn't making any progress with. And I was frustrated, but he came in and said, so you speak to ABC? And I said, yes. He said, who do you speak to there? I said, I speak to Tom. And he said, I know Tom really well. He said, Tom and I go back a long way. We've done some great business together. We've had some great times together. Get a meeting with him. We're going down to his office. We're going to sort this out. We're going to find out why he's not dealing with us. So I felt that this is basically, dead man walking for me, going down to this client meeting. The client is going to say, Derek is rubbish, get him away from us. We don't want to talk to him. So I felt it was really, you know, this was almost like the last rites for me. So we go down, we go into the meeting room. We're waiting for Tom. My leader at the time was saying to me, yeah, God, I remember these offices so well. And, you know, it's all coming back to me now. Just line after line, you know, that you couldn't make up. So Tom comes in, and Tom comes straight up to me, shakes my hand, says, hi, Derek, good to see you again. Turns to my leader and says, hey, I'm Tom. I don't think we've ever met before.
Line after line, lie after lie.
So my immediate thought clearly was, he must have mistaken him for a different Tom. But there was no other Tom in that company, that's for sure. I knew that for sure. It then descended into complete farce, because the individual never said anything for the entire meeting. Myself and Tom had a good chat, which, you know, ironically resulted in us doing business going forward. The man who knew everything said nothing for the entire meeting. In the cab on the way back, he left the meeting. I assumed he was going to say something like, you know, you meant Tom Murphy. I was talking about Tom, you know, Delaney. But there was no mention of anything. What had happened was simply just erased from history. We drove all the way back to the office. We talked about football. We talked about American football. You name it. We talked about everything. But we did not talk about Tom or their fictitious relationship. And it never, ever came up in conversation again. The client never came up in conversation again. And I went back and speaking to my colleagues, we all said, how can this guy expect us to have any respect for him?
Yeah.
If he is so full of baloney.
Yeah.
So it was a surreal time anyway in financial markets. But we had some surreal people who's kind of passed through our various organizations. And I think that, you know, during the noughties, I suppose, when we had this credit bubble, a lot of people made great names for themselves based on nothing except the value of the franchise that they represented. So they weren't adding any value themselves. They ended up leading huge teams because, maybe they were very good at managing upwards, but they weren't really very good. And as Warren Buffett once said, when the tide goes out, you find out who's swimming naked. And that day I found out who was swimming naked, and thankfully it wasn't me.
No,
So,
but we were.
I say that with great happiness, I must say.
Yeah, no, it's Derek, that I've come across a number of occasions in that kind of sector that you've been describing.
Yeah.
Particularly at that period of time, and since, less so now, more of them are getting about it, where there are some of the sort of Donald Trump type white collar psychopaths who believe their own story and will rewrite history to suit them and big themselves up and grab credit where it's not due, and try and grab clients and everything else from the people around them, and not really care who they damage in the process, which I think is why we had so much of a problem with swaps and derivatives and things like that, because people were just trying to make as much as they could and not concerning about the legacy and the consequences.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, it was probably emblematic of what was a generally toxic culture. I mean, I would have to say at BNP Paribas, we never suffered from the sort of, most egregious excesses of that. Toxic masculinity was really what it was, and we've always pushed ourselves in terms of conduct, and but you always have outliers as well. So, but they do get found out quite quickly, which is good. And I honestly believe things have improved. I don't believe that individuals like that would last 5 seconds these days. Because there has been an entire shift in terms of how organizations behave culturally. And how people behave towards their subordinates.
Yeah. And so from that, or indeed anything else, before we go into a story about your upbringing and growing up in the southeast of Ireland, what would be your sort of top tip linked to that, a practical tip that people could take away that is a bit of wisdom?
I think, honestly, I think so. I mean, leadership tips: communicate. You've got to be able to communicate with your people, even if the message is not a palatable one. I don't think you if you want the job as leader, or if you are in the position of being a leader, by definition, you have to lead, and that means leading from the front, not leading from behind. You need to be there for your people. You need to, I think, lead with respect. Respect is a big thing for me. It's a big thing for our organization, which is why I suppose I love working there. But respect for everybody, whether you're dealing with the chairman of a global multinational or the graduate intern, you've got to treat people with respect. It reminds me that the quote from Muhammad Ali. He said, if I'm in a restaurant, I never trust anybody who's rude to the waitstaff, because I know if I was in that position, they'd treat me the same. And I think that's really absolutely right. So, treat people with respect, be true to yourself. There is no situation ever, honestly, I genuinely believe this, that's perfect, that you've done a perfect job. We have leaders clearly who tell us they're doing a perfect job all the time. But you critical self-analysis, being true to self, respect, exemplary conduct, and communication. Communicate with your teams at all times. Be transparent. They would be, my top 4 or 5 things that I've learned over the last 5 years that I think are absolutely key.
And never more important than during this time of the global pandemic, when everybody's working from home. What other tips and advice have you learned that works well for you and the leaders you've got with you during this time of working from home in this this unprecedented time?
Yeah, no, it is, you're right. I mean, we've all learned to be more nimble than we ever thought we could possibly be, I think, over the last 10 or 11 weeks. But it actually has. I mean, I think communication is key at any time, crisis or no crisis. What we have found invaluable for myself personally and for the people that I work with has been constant communication. So there has been a big ask of everybody in management in Ireland and elsewhere around the globe to be in constant communication with your teams when they're working remotely. And it's not about checking up on people, Jonathan. It's about checking in. Are you okay? Is everything okay? What are your concerns today? We have an amazing HR team who have done an incredible job of identifying any individuals within the organization who may be vulnerable to feeling, that they're being left behind. And the message has been very clear all along. Nobody gets left behind in this. We're going to cross the finish line together, all of us. And that has come all the way from the group CEO of a company with, almost 200,000 people, right down to the smallest teams in, smaller locations like Ireland. We're going to cross the finish line together. But telling people how we're getting along. So, during the lockdown phase, where are we going? What are we doing? How many people are working remotely? Who's got the issues? To the beginning of the easing of the restrictions, how we get people back to work safely, because staff safety is the primary concern. So how can we get our staff back into a normal environment safely? How can we continue to protect our clients, and how can we protect the bank?
Yeah,
and they're the three key things. I think the key lesson that we have learned is that even the largest of organizations, when given no alternative, can be incredibly nimble. So sometimes maybe we make life difficult for ourselves by overthinking things. We got to a point where, in Ireland, we went from virtually 0% work from home to 98% work from home within 48 hours.
Wow.
We accepted the fact that we had to run an elevated level of operational risk during that time. But, again, touch wood, it's been okay. It's been okay. And people have behaved brilliantly. They have just outdone themselves because they recognize that the bank is doing everything it can to protect them. Our people have just been incredible in terms of responding to that by doing the best they can to protect the bank. So it's, it goes back to something I spoke about recently in terms of, is the relationship a symbiotic one between employer and employee? And you have to feel that it is. Otherwise, we have to look out for our teams, but there is a quid pro quo. Clearly, we expect them to do their best to ensure that the bank is protected at all times.
Yeah, no, it's lovely to hear, and great practical points that resonate with the other leaders that I'm talking to. Good, thank you for that. So let's go back in time to you as a young lad. Tell me about your upbringing, your parents, any family, and how that shaped you and the leader you are, and some of the journeys and amusing moments or moments that were hard, and what you learned about that.
Yeah. Well, clearly your upbringing shapes you in many ways that maybe you can't even identify yourself. But, I come from a very small town in the southeast of Ireland, in County Wexford, which, by the way, is the most beautiful county in Ireland. I know you'll say Donegal, but trust me, Wexford is the most beautiful county in Ireland. But a small town. My father was the local doctor, and my first observation, I suppose, in speaking about my father and my mother, was they worked incredibly hard. My father, he obviously worked in an analog age. There was no mobile phones. He covered a huge radius as the local GP. And when I think back on it, he worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for probably 40 years. And it was just his way of life. He never complained. There was certainly times when he probably survived on 2 or 3 hours of sleep because, he'd get a phone call at 2 a.m. to say, oh, Jimmy, 20 miles from here has got a stomach pain. He would drive down there. He'd come back, get back to the house at about 4 a.m. And my mother would say, oh, Frankie, who lives next door to Jimmy, his wife has just gone into labor, and he'd have to get in the car and go back. Oh, okay. So, but growing up, we just accepted this as normality. When you look back now in 2020, you say, wow, those people worked incredibly hard. So hard work absolutely a value that was instilled at a very, very early age. I'm the youngest of 7 children, very Irish,
Yep.
Catholic family. So it's funny, these days when I say to people, I was the youngest of 7 children, say, oh, you must have been really spoiled when you were growing up. I don't remember it like that. I remember you had to, as the youngest, you were the first person to get beaten up every time there was a problem by your brothers or sisters. I guess you get tough or die. And the town that we came from, and I still have family down there, and we still visit there regularly. It is not an affluent town in the 2020 sense. I mean, it's a small town, farming community largely, but even though people were poor, and maybe not a huge amount of, say, people with third level education, in some cases not even second level education, they're very, very smart and very, very clever and very, very innovative and hardworking people. And you can, people like that are tough as teak, really. And you can learn a lot. You do learn a lot from them because they shape how you are as an individual. And I think, my coming from a small country town, such as my hometown of New Ross, I think you become a lot tougher and maybe more streetwise than people who live in more privileged backgrounds. We never wanted for anything when we were growing up because we didn't know what we were missing. So it was great. But I think, it teaches you to be tough. And also you recognize that the people who have nothing are not necessarily any worse off than people who have everything. And in actual fact, that there are a lot of people who are very, very poor, but they have a dignity in their poverty that people who amass wealth beyond the dreams of avarice will never have. And I think, again, when you come back to the fundamentals of leadership, having grown up in an environment where money, or put it another way, where success is not defined by how much money you have, but how you carry yourself and how you feel in yourself, is a much, much more important metric for me. So I think that's probably the key. I mean, it's you learn a lot from being out. I mean, having worked in London and Dublin, being all over the financial centers of the world, it's they're literally a galaxies away from my small town of New Ross. But New Ross taught me how to survive, I think, in those cultures in a way that maybe others would not understand.
It's a great story. What about amusing stories as you're growing up, and your highlights of your career thus far? What would you say the highlights and some of the best and the amusing stories?
I'm trying to think. I mean, life was always good, I'd have to say, when we were growing up. I mean, we lived when I bring my daughters down to my hometown, or we don't go down as much now as we used to, but they look at me like I'm sort of some kind of Tom Sawyer character. Like, they can't understand how free and easy and I would say unneurotic our existence was. We were playing out in fields, we were swimming in the local river, we were fishing in the local river, and life for say 15 to 25-year-olds now is just completely different. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it's very, very different. So it's always funny to tell them stories about how we used to spend our summers when we were younger compared to how they spend their summers now. I suppose at a career level, honestly, the highlight of my career, without doubt, would be, getting the job that I have now, because it's just, I wouldn't have known at the time how much I would enjoy it. But in actual fact, when I was offered the job, I was terrified. I don't think I enjoyed the moment. I enjoyed it, yes, as in I've succeeded, and then it was, Christ, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
I've been out of my comfort zone pretty much on a daily basis for the last 5 years. And I think that's a really, again, looking back, I'm delighted that I have pushed myself to be outside of my comfort zone, because having spent the previous almost 30 years in capital markets, I have to ask them, was I learning anything new? And I don't think I was. And I remember sitting outside a pub in London, because I'd worked in London for about 4 years before I came back to Dublin. And myself and a colleague who's a good friend of mine, we were sitting there, and he said to me, he said, you know, we thought we were sort of on top of the world as masters of the universe in the bond markets. He said, you know, 10 years ago, I was earning way more money than my friends who were all trained as accountants and everything. He said, now that they're all CFOs and CEOs, he said, we're learning nothing. And I remember thinking about that, and I said to myself, he's absolutely right. And that's when I decided myself that I needed a career path that would actually teach me to evolve or help me to evolve. So getting this job was definitely the highlight. I hope it's not going to remain the highlight. I hope there will be other highs to come. But I think that, again, going out of your comfort zone, challenging yourself, taking on those things that you would rather not do, but that you know will make you a better person are key. So yeah, by far, that's been the highlight.
Great. And those are some of the highlights, and a lovely story of growing up in County Wexford. I would have loved to have been there. It sounded amazing. Yeah. And then what about during your life or your career, some of the darker moments, and what you learned from that, particularly your career, and what advice you'd give to others, having learned the hard way yourself?
Yeah. I think that, I mean, certainly from a career perspective, you know, I went through a period before I joined BNP Paribas where, you know, you don't, at the time you're in it, you don't realize you're in a completely dysfunctional relationship with either your manager or your employer as a whole. And you work maybe as part of a dysfunctional team. Nothing works. And you have absolutely no way of fixing it. But you begin to believe, you know, it becomes almost like an abusive relationship where, one, you feel that you're the one who's at fault. Two, the other party in the relationship constantly devalues you one way or another, either by ignoring you or by never sending you any positive messages, or if you're doing something wrong, by not telling you what you need to do right. So it's very easy to be a leader who says nothing, right? Anybody can be a leader who says nothing and just completely ignores everything, as opposed to saying, okay, Jonathan, you know, I am not happy with your performance. Here are the 5 things I need you to do over the next 3 months. Realistic things, by the way. And to help you then to try and unlock the cycle of abuse, for want of a better word. And, you know, so that complete lack of communication and dysfunctionality, which can go on for a period of years, and you spend your time trying to convince the other person of your worth. Whereas in actual fact, as with every relationship, there may just come a point where you realize, I am never going to be valued for who I am in this relationship. And therefore, I have to make a decision which I don't want to make, but it has to be done. There is no other choice to make. So I went through a period, I would say, where I was extremely unhappy in my work, and I did bring that home with me. I brought it home with me. So, you know, I wish I had been stronger at the time than to bring it home. But luckily, you know, I mean, my wife and my family are very, very supportive. So we got through it. And then I remember my father gave me a piece of advice, which was basically, you know what, don't make any rash decisions. I was thinking of just chucking everything in, basically. I was sick of it. He said, you've got to be patient. Things will always change if you believe yourself. And you can, obviously you can push for that change yourself. There's things you have to do. But he said, things will change. And he was right. Certainly within the next year, I had begun the conversation with BNP Paribas. I then got the job at BNP Paribas, and it's been an amazing journey ever since. So, but you know, you do have those times in your career where you were in a relationship with your employer that is just simply not a healthy one. There may be faults on your side. There's certainly faults on the other side. But I think when people consistently undermine you, devalue you, do not ascribe a value to you that you know you have yourself, so long as you're not completely delusional, then you have to ask yourself, is there any point in continuing? And I think, in terms of sort of not ascribing too high of a value to yourself, it goes back to what we discussed earlier, which is critical self-analysis. I think you should always ask yourself, what can I do differently? And so long as you're honest with yourself, and honest with what you believe the qualities you have are, then I think you'll come to the right answer.
Yeah, that's great. And so the final couple of questions before we wrap up, and I've really enjoyed this, is some leadership tips, a couple of tips that you might have to share, practical tips that people can take away with them. And then what's your own development as a leader? What are you going to be doing next in the rest of your life to keep learning, growing, and developing?
So what are my tips? Communication. I mean, the one thing you have to do, I think, as a leader is communicate. That's three things, but it's the same thing. Respect for colleagues, very, very important. You whether you're, like I say, speaking to the CEO of a multinational or the graduate intern, always treat people with respect. I think if you live by that value, then it will come back to you. I firmly believe in that. Don't kick the can down the road. There are going to be decisions that you will have to make, and they're not going to get better with time. It's not like wine, unfortunately. Sometimes unpalatable decisions just have to be taken. There are times when you will have people who work with you who are underperforming. That problem can be fixed through communication. But there are times when it just can't be fixed. And that goes back into whether the relationship is a good one or not. But I think you've got to help your people to understand. If you're not happy with the way they're doing something, you've got to explain to them what it is you want them to do. They may just have a completely wrong idea of what is expected of them. So if you don't have those conversations with them, how can they ever learn? I think that's key. In essence, it comes down to communication, really, Jonathan. When I think about it, if you are speaking to all of your stakeholders, and your stakeholders are your employees, your own management, your regulator, the society in which you operate, and if you're behaving with integrity, trying to do the best, and on an everyday basis, seeking to do the right thing, then honestly, I think that whether you realize it or not, you will be setting a good example.
Yeah, great advice. And finally, what about yourself? What do you
about myself? I don't know. I do love my job. I'm fortunate enough to work for an organization where there are multiple opportunities that get thrown up on an ongoing basis. For now, I think there are still a number of things that I want to complete in this role. But I would have to say I want to keep going. I want to keep learning. Whatever it is I'm doing, I want to be able to learn and evolve and grow. And I would love to think that, I played golf with a guy on Sunday who is a hugely successful entrepreneur. And he's still working at the age of 80. Not people say, oh God, the poor guy. No, he works because it keeps him alive. I mean, and I would love to think that I would be like that I would still be meeting people, that I would still be learning from them, and that I would still be evolving and active mentally and physically long into old age. For me, I really don't want a very, very long retirement.
No.
What would I do?
Yeah.
Certainly my wife doesn't want it, I can tell you that. Because that's many years away, I hope. But I would like to keep going, keep learning, keep evolving, and hopefully keep meeting people who teach me, how to be a better person. I honestly, that's what it's all about. And success is not about the monetary value. It's about, are you happy in yourself?
Right.
So continue to strive for success, Jonathan.
Well, Derek Kehoe, thank you very much, CEO of
Pleasure to talk to you.
Paribas Ireland. It's lovely talking to you. I've really enjoyed the session, and stay in touch.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Take care.
Bye.